Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 343. In this episode, we're continuing our journey through the Fall of Númenor by exploring the chapter Circa 1000, Sauron Chooses Mordor. The actual title is much longer than that, so for reference, I'll read the whole thing. Circa 1000, Sauron, alarmed by the growing power of the Númenorians, chooses Mordor as a land to make into a stronghold. He begins the building of Barad-dûr. Yeah, that's a mouthful, but it contains a lot of the important details of the chapter right there. Before we get started, I'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Very nice. A little off kilter there. Sorry about that. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Melkor27, and KG. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in August of 2023. Got a long list here. Ann E., Garrett P., Mario G., Matt R., Ben D., Lauren H., William H., Henry B., Jonathan L., Austin B., and Carol W. Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years. Join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lend you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. If you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. Finally, attention binge listeners, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. Well, after our deep dive into the story of Númenor's pivotal sixth king, Tar-Aldarion, we return now to Sauron. I think this chapter gives a great introduction to what's at stake, so let's just give the first few sentences a read. News of the founding of Eregion and the friendship and shared craftsmanship between the elves who dwelt there and the dwarves of Khazad-dûm came to the ears of Sauron, and increased the fears that he felt concerning the coming of the Númenorians to Lindon and the coasts further south, and their friendship with Gil-galad. And he heard tell also of Aldarion, son of Tar-Aldarion, the king of Númenor, now become a great shipbuilder who brought his vessels to haven far down into the Harid. The original sources for this chapter are primarily Unfinished Tales and The Lord of the Rings. But let's discuss that opening. So Sauron establishes Mordor based on fear. He fears the growing friendship of the elves, the dwarves, and possibly the Númenorians as well. In this, I detect a foreshadowing of the Fellowship of the Ring, in which we find the same sort of alliance, albeit on a smaller scale. Few things are as daunting to evil as the friendships of their foes. But Sauron is wiser than a serpent, and learned the craft of his master Morgoth well. So he leaves the free western regions of Middle-earth alone for a period long enough to establish himself as a force truly to be reckoned with. As far as Mordor itself, let's learn about how Sauron came to be there and what it was like. The next section concerns the shape of Mordor. It's a shape familiar to most of us from the maps included in The Lord of the Rings. I'll go ahead and share this map just so we can refresh ourselves on it, but here it is down in the bottom right corner of this map from Lord of the Rings. We see the land of Mordor. It has that shape to it, right? That U on its side kind of shape, or if you will, maybe a very square-shaped C. And it is it really looks like a fortress with the exception of the eastern side of it, the backside, which is pointed away to a region we know very little about. As far as its actual fortifications, the mountains around it, they are pointed towards its areas of main concern. The mountains to the north are the Ered Lithui, or Ash Mountains. The mountains to the west are the Mountains of Shadow. So none of these mountain ranges sound particularly welcoming. Ash Mountains, Mountains of Shadow. And then, of course, we have Mount Doom. Mount Doom is located actually still pretty far to the northwest of the land of Mordor. It's always kind of struck me as surprising how much behind kind of that main area of Mordor that we think about because of Frodo and Sam's journey into it in The Lord of the Rings. There's really It's really a much vaster region than even what we see written of there or depicted in Peter Jackson's films. But here's what it says about Mount Doom. Mount Doom, or Barad-dûr, which means burning mountain, is described as follows. A huge mass of ash and slag and burned stone, out of which a sheer-sided cone was raised into the clouds. The lands all about were scarred from its violent volcanic eruptions, which were not made by Sauron but were a relic of the devastating works of Melkor in the long First Age. This frightful prospect was to remain for many years, even until the Third Age. Ever and anon, the furnaces far below Barad-dûr's ashen cone would grow hot, and with a great surging and throbbing, pour forth rivers of molten rock from chasms in its sides. Some would flow blazing towards Barad-dûr down great channels. Some would wind their way into the stony plain until they cooled and lay like twisted dragon shapes, vomited from the tormented earth. Yeah, well, sounds like a nice place for a vacation, doesn't it? Pretty awful sounding. It is just this, almost giant pimple on the face of the earth, just kind of constantly spewing forth all kinds of grossness into the world. Of course, this will be the place that Sauron, eventually comes to forge the ring, the One Ring, his great One Ring, the source of so much trouble and travail in the Second and Third Ages. One thing I would note here, actually, am I noting it too early? So I don't see where. Oh, there we go. It says it was not made by Sauron, but was a relic of the devastating works of Melkor in the long First Age. Now, here's the thing. All right, so the actual quotation is in full is, the lands all about were scarred from its violent volcanic eruptions, which were not made by Sauron, but were a relic of the devastating works of Melkor in the long First Age. Now, I think what this means actually is not that Melkor made Mount Doom, but that the scarring of the earth about it was made by Melkor in the long First Age. And that's interesting on one note, because we typically think of Melkor and his works having more to do with this land of Beleriand, which was far, far away to the northwest and has now, vanished under the seas. But we do know there are notes that tell us that Melkor had operations, Morgoth had operations going on even in other regions beside Beleriand that we just don't know very much about. But he was at work amongst the men, certainly, of these regions, and probably amongst the elves as well. So my take on this is not that it means that Melkor himself created Mount Doom, but that he at least created a lot of the scarring that's involved, that that is there in this land. Now, maybe you read it differently. I'm open to hearing other cases for whether it was actually Melkor. Does Tolkien mean that Melkor created Mount Doom? I don't know. I think there may be another reference to this somewhere in one of his letters, but I don't have it right in front of me. I know I've discussed this maybe in the context of the show The Rings of Power, because, spoiler alert, I'll pause there if you don't want to go ahead and see it. Spoiler alert. All right, you've been alerted. Sauron does create Mount Doom in that show in the first season. So, I think he creates it. I've only seen it once, so... but I know we talked about it, I think perhaps in the context of that show a little while back. So be my guest to go back and check me on that. Anyway, Mount Doom does not sound like the kind of place that I'd want to go on vacation, and I'm guessing you wouldn't either. All right. So what about Barad-dûr? Well, Barad-dûr is this tower of Sauron. And when we say tower, it's really more like this great fortress. It was constructed over 600 years and hidden from the Eldar and the Edain. It is described as a vast fortress, armory, prison, furnace of great power. It represented the dreadful menace of the power that waited, brooding in deep thought and sleepless malice behind the dark veil about its throne, like the oncoming of a wall of night at the last end of the world. When I read about Barad-dûr, it makes me think of, these vast fortresses that were constructed in Europe, especially like along the frontier between France and Germany, leading up to World War I. What is that called? Is that called the Maginot Line? I know that there were these just great fortresses with lots of like underground tunnels connecting them. And because of those fortresses, that's why Germany, when they first invaded, went through Belgium. They had this von Schlieffen plan, which was supposed to go around and kind of flank, this line of fortresses so they wouldn't just jut up against them. But the description here really reminds me of, just it brings to mind that. I don't know if that's what Tolkien had in mind. It wouldn't surprise me to learn somewhat that he did, given his experiences in World War One. But yeah, it's just this vast, vast fortress. We don't really think about these sorts of fortresses in this day and age anymore, but in times past, certainly for many, many centuries and millennia, this was maybe the standard way of thinking about, about warfare, right? Is constructing these kind of vast strongholds, places to do battle, or to do battle from. There's a great image in here, by the way, by Alan Lee, entitled "The Building of Barad-dûr." Give a quick glimpse of that. Go buy the book if you want to look at it longer. Really, really very cool picture. This is one that I'd love to see a full blown up image of, just because does seem to be so much detail to it. But we really see it, I think, depicted well, not as simply, just a tower, but as this vast sort of stronghold with many towers within it, looking out upon Mount Doom, which really, in the grand scheme of things, is not that far away from Barad-dûr. Okay, so maybe Sauron had some like giant fans to keep the volcanic lava from exploding and hitting Barad-dûr and ruining his great work there. I don't know. That's just speculation. I'm sure he had a plan to deal with it. All right. Well, just a little more, on Barad-dûr. It's really, it's a city built for the purpose of war. And in this, it's something like an anti-city. It's not built to encourage the flourishing of the common good of free peoples, but it's constructed to dominate. Just this, I think about the idea of building a city whose sole purpose is to build an army, is to construct an army. And, it just seems very Sauronic to me, right? This is something that only, an evil mind would devise for themselves. I'm not a total pacifist in the sense of saying that there's never a time to fight a war, because in my mind, I can't imagine that in some cases you've got to, right? In some cases you've got to, but I'm not a big fan of the idea of constructing these vast fortresses and these kinds of things, for their own sake. To me, that is a very Sauronic sort of aim, and that seems to be something that I think Tolkien would have agreed with, from everything that I've gathered about how he thought about the world and world history and warfare. Well, the last item in this chapter has to do with Tar-Aldarion. We get this brief note. Of the later years of Númenor's king Tar-Aldarion, nothing can now be said, save that he seems to have continued his voyages to Middle-earth, and more than once left An-Calimé as his regent. His last voyage took place about the end of the first millennium of the Second Age. So Tar-Aldarion continues with his voyages back to Middle-earth, and I think at some points it was tempting to think that this was just sort of Aldarion indulging himself, but we come to realize that maybe he is going about these things, at least later on, with good purpose, right? He really wants to better understand what this growing menace is in Middle-earth, and to prepare Númenor and to aid Númenor's allies in preparing themselves for this menace, to defend themselves against this menace, which I think is a good purpose. So that's really one of the last words we're going to get on Tar-Aldarion, at least as far as his actual lifetime goes. Okay, so while this was a fairly short chapter, it does tell us some detail about the pivotal founding of Mordor and Sauron's mindset entering the second millennium of the Second Age, during which he would increasingly make his presence felt and undertake certain projects that would have profound implications for thousands of years to come. Next time, we'll catch up with Tar-An-Calimé, as well as Sauron's first attempts to seduce the Eldar to his service. As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. Thank you to our amazing fellowship, especially the following patrons: John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Melkor27, KG, Emilio P., Jonathan D., Robert H., Paul D., Julia, Werty, JoeBagelMan, Richard K., Matt R., Matthew W., John W., Eugene D., Chris B., Daniel S., Seb M., Cory C., Carolyn S., Ms. Anonymous, Andrew T, Redhawk, Shannon S, Brian O, Zeke F, James L, Chris L, Asya V, Ish of the Hammer, Teresa C, David of Pints with Jack, and Eric B. Thank you all so much for your support. We truly appreciate you and all of our fellowship. And thanks to everybody for watching and or listening. We will talk at you next time. Bye-bye.